Well, welcome back. My name is Jack Burgess. As most of you might know, or probably do know, my layout is completely done. I finished in 2011. All the structures that I ever want are done. I still want to build things. And so I've been working on some boxcars because my goal is to build every flat car, every boxcar, etc. that the railroad owned in 1939. And working on some boxcars and some things got sideways. I got frustrated. I felt like I wanted to build something, but I thought, let's just put that away and build something different. So I'm building a station that I don't have room for on my layout. Because one of my other goals is to build a model of every station the Yosemite Valley Railroad had in 1939. And I'm only missing 3. One of them I built once for a friend. That's the one I'm building now. And I've got a 2-story one to do. And then I've got one that's going to take me 2 hours. It's real small. So what I want to talk about is kind of the planning that I do when I get a project like this. You've heard some of it on my video on research. So I'm going to put some of that research to work here. And then I also want to show you some of the steps I did. I'm not going to teach you how to do 3D drawing, but I'll show you what the concept's like. Same thing with CAD, computer-aided drafting. I took a drafting class when I was in high school, I think it was, and we did drawings with a pencil, and it was a regular pencil. It wasn't a mechanical pencil, as I recall. But I've always loved drafting, and my very first job was I was hired as a draftsman. I was going to college, had a dropout after my middle of my junior year, and the city of Newark, where I live, we're thinking about hiring somebody as a kind of a draftsman aide and so forth. And so I started drafting for them, and now instead of pencil, it was ink on linen, which you got to be real careful before you make a line down, because if it's not right, you've got to erase it. You could draw it in 10 seconds, and you could erase it for an hour. So I've always loved drafting, and I still love it. When I started, there were no computers. And we started getting computers, and you could start finding computerized drafting programs. And I got a couple. One of them was really bad. And then I bought another one for the city, and I used it. People that worked for me were using it. I still use it. It's so old that when we bought it, we were using, if you're old enough to remember the computer era, we were running on a 386 computer, or maybe it was 486, one of those, and that's what I still run it on. We bought Pentiums, and I tried to load it on a Pentium computer, and it wouldn't run. So I called the manufacturer, and they said, "You're trying to run it on what?" It won't run on a computer that's that fast. So I still have an old computer. The only thing I do with it is drafting, and I'll show you some of that. So why don't we get started? This is the building that I want to build. It was the station at Snelling. I drew this plan up back in 2004, and I've had quite a bit of information. As I mentioned in the research one, the California Railroad Commission did an inventory of all of the buildings, the equipment, everything on the entire railroad in 1914. And the descriptions were pretty detailed, and they even told you what color the roof was, and so forth. I don't have a lot of photos of this building. I have about 15. All except one were taken after 1942, when the station agent was removed from the station and they took down the train order board. So when I originally drew it up, I assumed the windows were the same as some other stations and so forth. Well, fortunately, I got this photo a few years ago, and I don't know what this person was taking this picture for, but it's straight on view of one end of the station. And what I was able to do then is take that photo and measure the size of the window, and I'll show you that now. I've been using Photoshop since it first came out way back in the 80s, and on my website I have a category called clinics, and if you're interested in Photoshop, one of those clinics is on Photoshop, and I have notes on how to do a lot of stuff, some very, very, very simple stuff and more complex stuff. This is not that hard. So the first thing you'll notice is the photographer down here, one of those people, didn't have his camera totally vertical. I can understand that because I have that problem myself. So the first thing I'm going to do is put a grid on here and get this stuff lined up. So I'll do a Control A. When I do Control, you can go up here, and Control is a simple way of getting from Edit to selecting all or something, I don't know. And T, and that'll let you rotate. And so we rotate. That looks pretty good. And now I'm going to turn the grid off. Okay, so now I'm going to zoom in. And what do we know about this building? We know it was 16 feet wide. What we don't know is how wide the window is or how tall the window is. So Photoshop, several years ago, actually had a tool that you can measure on a photo or measure whatever you wanted to. They got rid of it. I don't know why. And it was very frustrating to me because that program will not run on this Windows 10 computer. I do have another computer down here with Adobe programs, and for a while I would do what I'm going to do now on using the older program. But here's the workaround. We take this rectangular tool here and we draw a box so that it starts on one side of the building, ends on the other side. And if we go to, it told us before I dropped that off, it was telling me, but we can come down here to Info, Dimension, and we just measured 5.734. So then we write that down, take the tool again, and measure the width of the window. And you notice that it looks like the trim is broken off there. So why don't we come up here to the top and measure the window? Or what we could do is measure the window itself and not the trim and write that down. And then look at the trim. We could actually measure the trim. Is that 3-inch trim or is it 2? It looks to me like a 3 or 4-inch wide trim. So I mean, that's the accuracy you can do. So when I did that, here's the dimensions I had when I measured this before, is we knew that it was 16 feet wide, and the width of the building I had is 5.653. The width of the glass is 1.023. Now what we have to do to get the actual width of this glass is we take the width of the glass, divide it by the width of the building, and multiply by 16. It gives us an answer of 2.89. Now, is it 2.89? This is when you have to say, okay, we're making a lot of assumptions here. So at this point, I would say that glass is 3 feet wide. They don't make glass windows, maybe 2.75, probably not. It's a 3 foot wide window. We can do the same thing here and get the height, and then we would know the height and so forth. We can add the size of the trim, add mullions and so forth, and away we go. Another resource that I didn't have originally that I now have is this 1907 actual floor plan for the building. And that really helped. I knew how big the building was, but one thing I didn't know was it has a bay window. I knew that. But by having this drawing, I could figure out the angle of the side windows on that bay window. They're 60 degrees. And it also shows me what the interior was. You know, I kind of knew they had a waiting room and an area for the station agent and a storage area for freight and so forth. But this drawing helped. Another thing that came up is that I was told that this station was very much like a Santa Fe station, and that a particular book had plans for it. And so this is that book. I bought it just because of this drawing, and that is the same station. I think it's a little bit longer, but this is a standard Santa Fe number 3. And that makes some sense because the YV was kind of they had a very good, strong partnership with the Southern Pacific, but they also interchanged with the Santa Fe. And so I can see back in 1907, they need to build a station. They had a temporary station at Snelling that was very, very, just a little building, something you could buy at Home Depot these days. And they wanted to replace it with a permanent station. So why start from scratch? You know, you didn't have to have an architect design it and so forth. But if you could get the plans for the Santa Fe Depot and say, okay, we want to build it just like that, but I want it 16 by 38 and same size windows, same type of windows and so forth, that would make it very easy, and there's no pride of ownership, so forth. So my goal was to now build the structure that incorporated those changes, the new windows, so forth. So the first step was to modify my CAD drawing of the station, incorporate the new windows and so forth, get it correct. And that may seem like a lot of effort, except that I have done over 100 drawings of stations, all of the box cars, the flat cars, a couple of engines. Like I said, I love drafting, and I sell those on a CD. And so if I know that something is wrong, I want to change it and put the new drawing so it'll become part of a CD. So this program is called Sketchup. It's used to draw in 3D. This fellow is a guy that worked on it the first thing I do, and I think they put him on there so that people could get an idea if they want to draw something 6 feet high, you know, then that's about high. I get rid of it. So here's the essence of 3D drawing. Let's grab this tool which will draw a rectangle, and in SketchUp you always draw full size. If you're drawing a boxcar, you're drawing something that's 40 feet long. It's not HO scale, it's not in scale, it's real scale. When you're all done, then you reduce it to whatever scale you want. The advantage of that is if I'm drawing a pipe and I know it's a 1/2 inch diameter pipe, then I'm drawing it a 1/2 inch in diameter. I'm not calculating, okay, 1/2 inch in HO scale is this. I draw it exactly what it is. So in this case, we're going to start here and we're going to draw a rectangle. Now we're going to start drawing 3D. You take this tool here, click, and now it's 3D. And we can rotate, we look under it, over it, and you notice it's floating in the sky. It's not resting on the ground. And there is one option you can have that you don't have the green. I like the green because it looks nice. And it really what it does is kind of brings you down, and so you know where you are and you don't get lost. But we can then draw a circle, and it's this big, and pulls out, so forth. So that is basically what you're doing now. It's very easy to screw around, and I've taught or allowed some of our grandkids that were 10 years old to play with this, and as soon as I showed them 3 things, they were off. They were drawing all kinds of buildings and space, all kinds of stuff. Of course, nothing to scale, and nothing real. That's the difference. So let's take this version. So what I tell people is sometimes you'll get going on a project and you're drawing along, and then and saving, and then you say, oh man, 3 times ago I did something that I really wish I hadn't done. You can go back. So this is a step that I'd saved when I'm working on doing the windows for the Snelling station. This is an end window that was right up at the eave in the storage area for freight. And so what I've done is I've drawn the outside of the window based on my 2D drawing. And what I will do is I will have this running the same time my CAD program is running. So when I want to draw this window in 3D, I zoom in on my regular drawing and I can measure and say, okay, it's this far. In fact, we could actually measure this with the measuring tool, and this is 4 feet 11 inches. And I remember that's how wide this window is. So then you can also add guidelines. And so here's the guidelines. This is going to be the trim around the windows. This is going to be part of the framing. So we take this and we pull this out. Okay. And down here it tells me how far I've turned. Right now it's about 6 inches thick. And I know I don't want it 6 inches thick. So I'm going to put in a 2. And now the trim is 2 inches thick. And this trim inside will make it, that's the trim around the window. And then if we click on this, we now have a window. So this window had mullions in it, and so I hadn't drawn those yet, but that is the essence of how you draw these things. So let me show you this one. This is the sprue of all of the parts that I drew up for the Snelling station. And here's that window that I was working on a minute ago. I tipped it up because the window is actually horizontal. I tipped it up so it takes less space. The cost of this is based on how much material is used. So this is the bay windows. And when I got to this point, I thought, well, actually what I did is I drew up the 2 different windows. There's 2 different windows here. There's one and a narrow one for the side. And I drew those. And then I thought about it. I thought, man, it is always a pain to draw or to build a bay window because you got to get the windows and keep everything plumb and so forth. And I thought, actually, because there was a desk right behind here, so I could actually mount the windows right on that. And then I thought there was also supports under it. Why build those out of styrene? I can print them. So I added that. And now there's also a T&G V-groove siding between the windows. And so I added little bitty things here to kind of keep those pieces in line. But then I thought about it more and I thought, this would be even better if I had some supports that I could glue that styrene V-groove to. So that's what's going on here. This is going to be inside the building. You won't see it. But I needed to have these go up and terminate somewhere else. They would kind of wobble. Right here is the stovepipe. I did 2 of them. It's very, very small. But they're so small I was afraid I might lose one. Why not go ahead and do it? What I was also thinking is there's not that much furniture in this building. In fact, the only furniture that I know would be there would be a chair for the station agent. So I tell people that drawing in 3D is addictive. And I've several people that have gotten into this agree. So what I end up doing is trying to think, what else can I draw? This is so much fun. So in this particular case, I went online, looked for chairs in Google. If you just Google chair, you'll get 1 million hits or more. And if you go to images, you'll see all the images. And there was, I think maybe I Googled plans for a chair or something, I don't know. But up pops a chair with dimensions in millimeters. So obviously this was done overseas. And so I just copied that. And it made the height the same height as the chair I'm sitting on. So I've got the chair. Here's the 5-panel doors. And these are the sliding doors that are for the freight portion. So this whole sprue cost me about $30, I think it was. And that was with an extra $7 included to get to the front of the line and get it printed faster. So now we have the templates. This has been printed on regular old paper, but this is the sides of the building and so forth. So the next step is to print it on the sticker paper. This is the current Avery number. I just bought this the other day. The only difference between this and what I was using is this is a white sheet where this is transparent. So you peel it off and you can actually see through it, and they just don't make this anymore. So what I did is I took styrene, I printed it on this kind of stuff, stuck it on, peeled off the rest, and then just cut it out. You have all the lines, and I talked about this in the styrene clinic. So rather than drawing that up, I just print it and go from there. Now, this is repositionable, so you can actually take it off, and somebody told me that once you take it off and you put it back on, you can't get it off again. But usually, it's not that big a deal. So, one thing you need to do is make sure, if you're using scribe styrene, that the scribes are going the right direction. I didn't learn that or realize that until I had cut out all these pieces. Here's that end piece with that little window at the top. This is the back. The scribes are going vertically. They should go horizontally. So this was a waste. Very frustrating when I realized that. I had my drawing here, I was working on something, and I can't believe I did that. So I printed them up again, and so here's the building at this point. The windows are all cut out. The windows, the 3D windows will fit in there and so forth. And on the styrene clinic, I mentioned using a couple of squares like this one. You have two of them, and you can build a building that way. On this one, I use some clamps like this one, and this is called the right clamp. They were sold by the designer directly. His website is down, but you can find them online through Amazon. They're about $30 a piece, so they're not cheap, and that's one reason I demonstrate a much cheaper way when you're getting started in styrene. These work really well, and they have got pads in there. Now, the problem I found right off when I was using this the first time on this kit was that the MEK I use leaked under this foam, and so I got most of it scraped off. So that led me to modifying one of these. So this is the same clamp, but I turned this part around, turned this section right here around and put wood in it. So now the plastic is out here, and this has a piece of wood in it. I found that I could glue things together with this and not have a problem with MEK leaking into the wood, because it won't bond to the wood and there's nothing to deteriorate. So that's what I used when I actually assembled this. These work out really well. The pads, I might buy one more, because for building resin boxcars, these work out really well. The pad takes care of little problems. The side of the boxcar might have rivets or something. And what this allows you to do is take your time, get everything aligned, uptight, and then add glue. And you can add glue between here or in here and glue it together. So these are a good investment especially if you're doing resin kits. You probably already have a set, but for styrene they work well also. Okay, so here is my sprue you saw on the computer, and actually what I did is, I'm a very impatient person, so on that sprue I went and I measured the actual width of each window, the backside, to get the size of the holes I needed, and took a chance that they were going to be right, and they were. The 3D printing, over a long distance, things accumulate, little errors will accumulate, but on something like a window, what you drew was what you're going to get. So for some reason, I didn't do it and I didn't pay for it, but they sent me 2 sprues. So here's the windows and so forth. What I was able to do is, for example, this is the main window. I was able to take that window and again, I'm working on my incorrect ones, but I was able to file that window opening so that this fit in just perfectly. So I don't know why I got two. This one, they gave me one in the smoothest resin and one in the regular resin. This is the regular one. I had to use my 10 power magnifiers to see the difference. Now, you'll notice that the windows are kind of warped, and you can really see it right here, that this window is kind of got a curve to it. That's not a huge issue. What you can do is get some water, heat it up to 140 degrees, and I have a thermometer, and check it. And then take your tweezers, hold it there, don't drop it into the pan, hold it in the water for about 12 seconds, pull it out, and it will be pliable. You can sit there and play with it. Get it all nice and straight, and then put something on it to hold it that way as it cools. And so having an extra set of these is nice because that lets me try getting these things flat again. So there's my bay window. That's all curved. So I'm going to see if I can get these straight, and, or better yet, get these straight. Or when I get my styrene and I slide it in there, will the styrene make them straight? So this gives me some practice. I'm not sure what I can do to have these windows not as warped as these are. Windows that I've printed before come out flat, but these I made them really thin. I try to keep things as thin as I can. The minimum thickness for a part in HO is 1 1/8. And all these mullions printed, and they're all only a scale, 1 1/8 thick, both width and depth. So the result is really good, but you have the potential of having things warped. So I started building the loading platform a week ago before I got my 3D parts, because I didn't want to put the building together and then try or need to file the window openings a little bit. So I wanted something to do, so I went ahead and built this. And one of the things I had to do was put the steps on. And I was thinking at the time, I should have drawn those in 3D, because I just really hate building stairs. But in the last styrene clinic, I also mentioned my Cricut 2D cutter. And I thought, just draw this up and cut out the stairs. And so that's what I did here. I'm still putting the stairs in. This building had what's called a hip roof on it. And I've built hip roofs before, and I had a problem because the overhang is so big, I think, that this thing warped. And so what I've done since then is I build up the roof on it and put holes in it, and then I pour plaster into it, and so the plaster gets into all the crevices and becomes solid, and then this thing can't warp. It's just impossible. So I've had a couple buildings that have been on the layout for 20 years or so, and they haven't warped. Now, my first effort, you can tell, I've had some setbacks on this project. I built the thing, filled it full of hydrocal because I had some hydrocal left over from doing scenery work, and it's still not set up. So I cut it in half so you can kind of see what it looks like inside here. This I went down, and I don't know if the hydrocal was too much water in it, or I think it was I think more likely it was too old. So I went down and bought some plaster of Paris, and I knew it was getting in because I would put some in, and then I would shake it, and the level would go down. So that meant that it was going into all the corners. So I know this is rigid. This one, well, still makes a mark. And I built this at least a week ago. So I finished that model probably 2 or 3 weeks after we shot the video itself. Here it is in the layout room. As I mentioned before, I don't have room for it on my layout. I didn't plan to have that station on the layout. There's no space for it. So it's in my display case. Since I finished that one, I finished another station called Clearinghouse. another one called Mountain King, very, very small. This was obviously an old boxcar. And right now I'm working on the fourth station that will not be on the layout. As soon as I finish that, that's it with structures. I don't have anything else to build. So that's it for this time. Hope to see you next time. This is the newest version, but the last year's version.
Virgin, huh?
I realized.
What are you thinking about?
Nothing. But last year's version. Let me just skip that. Okay.